Не пройдешь, если все. Ну вот это единственное.
Maybe we'll pause it there. So do you like that sound? Would you like to have that piano in your house?
Ну вот это есть на самом
Maybe,
деле.
maybe a lot of you are shaking your heads. It sounds slightly out of tune to me. And I think maybe the reason is that often with Beethoven's piano, there are 2 strings per note. It's really hard to get 2 strings exactly in tune. 1 string is what it is. 3 strings, you get the kind of homogenization of sound. 2 strings, it's a bit more difficult. I think it's the same thing with singers, oddly, too. When you're singing with 2 people, it's a little more difficult to tune up. 1 or 3, it's not an issue. So it does have this slightly out of tune sound to it. But nonetheless, that is Beethoven's Broadwood piano. What did Beethoven write for the piano? Well, 32 piano sonatas, and 5 piano concertos, most famous of which, and I put this on your, remember I gave you the essential Beethoven sheet a couple of weeks ago. Most important of these piano concertos is the so-called Emperor Concerto. So we have the Emperor Quartet by Haydn, the Emperor Concerto by Beethoven. So Beethoven wrote 5 piano concertos, 32 piano sonatas, and these piano sonatas were not so much, like Mozart's, teaching pieces. These were virtuosic pieces for Beethoven himself to play. How well did he play them? Well, you would think that he would play them absolutely superbly, but that contemporaries commented that his playing was kind of messy. Here's what one of them said, quote, "His playing is not clean. He has much fire, but he pounds a bit too much. He overcomes diabolical difficulties, but he does not do so neatly." Maybe, possibly, why might Beethoven have trouble as a performer here in the early 1800s? What was Beethoven's issue? Caroline? He was going deaf. So if he pounded a bit too much, perhaps it's understandable. But here's the kind of sound, perhaps, oh lordy, here's the kind of sound that the commenter might have had in mind, Beethoven pounding. Exaggerating a little bit to get across that idea. 2 points, I guess. One, what the piano could do for you, these extreme dynamics, and 2, perhaps Beethoven, because of his growing deafness, was pounding a bit too much. After Beethoven, pianos only continued to get larger and more powerful. Let's take a look at some of these later instruments. We're moving on now to a Graf piano. Graf was another maker who gave Beethoven an instrument. This comes, my own shot from the collection of historical musical instruments in Vienna itself. As time goes on here, what we find is that in order, as this instrument gets bigger, and we want a bigger soundboard, that thing underneath, that's the main resonator, okay? We need a bigger soundboard. And as this thing gets bigger and we want to put more tension on these strings to really pound so they don't break them or they don't come loose, we need some kind of iron support. So first they started putting pieces of iron, and then ultimately an entire frame, a bed of iron, cast iron, underneath that thing for that soundboard to rest in. Then we need at the other end, we need a pin block. And that pin block has to be very secure because that's where the pins that anchor the strings are going to be. Most of the problems, if you think you've got a deal on the piano sometime, check your pin block because you probably don't. It probably has cracks in it, and then you go to tighten that thing, get your instrument tuned. The next day it's back out of tune because that pin block is not holding. So you have to have a very secure pin block. You have to have a big resonator, and in order for that to be helped along, you need the cast iron frame underneath. All of these things allow for a bigger, more powerful instrument to be put into play. So this is a graph, as I say, from the collection in Vienna. The range of the instrument is getting bigger. The sound of the instrument is getting bigger. Let's go on to the next slide. Here's young Franz Schubert, about your age, young Franz Schubert, writing the kinds of pieces that we used in the review section, for example. And here's the piano that he was playing, also a graphed instrument in the Schubert Museum there in Vienna. The graphed instrument was also given not only to Schubert and to Beethoven, but also to Franz Liszt. Let's take a look at this, another graph. Let's move on to this. This, of course, is what? Where have you seen this before? Cover of the textbook. What is this? This is a marketing tool. Did these people that included Georges Sand, Alexandre Dumas, Père, Victor Hugo, Rossini, Paganini, did they ever come together and pose for this? No. They were in completely different cities. This is a marketing stuff. I was looking at a Brooks Brothers thing, which seemed to be shot in Princeton. But if you look carefully, it had all of these brown leaves on the thing, and the people had been patched in there, and the trees around the thing, they're all in bloom. I mean, this is a hodgepodge. Well, this is a hodgepodge too. But it's kind of an interesting one because it tells us a little bit about what the 19th century thought of Beethoven. Let's go to this last slide here. So here's Franz Liszt, the famous Franz Liszt playing the piano. He has the historian Marie d'Agoult at his knees there in a typical 19th century supplicatory position for women. And up at the top, who do we have? The bust of Beethoven in Olympian height, sort of looking down over the proceeding, blessing Liszt, and most importantly, blessing the graphed piano. Well, Liszt did play a graphed piano. Let's listen to, and we're going to have a slide here, Franz Liszt. Let's go on to the next slide. Oh no, well, there's one other composer I should mention that's a wonderful composer. I don't have time to do anything really with him in this course, but he's one of my favorites, Frédéric Chopin. Here's Chopin playing a Pleyel piano. And we have over our collection of Pleyel, right, not his piano, but right from the period that he was playing. And let's go on now. It should be the portrait of, I got him out of order. All right, let's go into the portrait of Liszt here. Portrait of Liszt. Here is Franz Liszt, and let's go back one now. And here is an Erard piano that Liszt played. It's actually in the collection of Buckingham Palace. But when Liszt went there and played for Queen Victoria, he played on this particular Erard instrument. So it looks very much like a modern instrument. Let's hear just a little bit of Liszt music. You have it as CD 4, track 1. It's a transcendental etude, a sort of hugely difficult technical study by Franz Liszt. Let's listen to just a bit of Liszt playing. This is called a study. There's some irony here. It's called a study in order you play this piece and you get better, okay? Now, how good would you have to be to begin with to play this piece? Holy schmoly. I mean, this is really difficult technically. Dan, have you ever played a Liszt Transcendental Etude? Oh, we had. Oh, we should have gotten to play a Liszt Transcendental Etude. It's kind of the top of the line. My guess is in Liszt day there probably six or seven people in all of Europe that could actually play these studies that were designed to get you to be a more proficient pianist. You were kind of out of the game before the game even began in an odd way. This is Liszt's Erard piano. I want to show just a couple more slides and then we'll introduce our guest. And we've seen the portrait of Liszt. I was struck when, at the Liszt Museum in Budapest, that when you walk in there and you see that Liszt played in his home, and there it is, it's a big instrument with two pedals down there. It's a chickering instrument. And you know where that instrument was made? In Boston. So Boston was a major, and New York also, here in the 1860s, 1870s, major manufacturing company, and they shipped one all the way to Budapest for Liszt to play. And a fine, fine piano indeed. A couple more and then we're going to stop. And of course, when Liszt died, they were particularly not so much interested in doing a death mask of his face, but one of his hands, because he was thought to have a very unusual sort of webbing between his fingers that allowed him to stretch in ways that other pianists couldn't. A few more, and then, as I say, we'll stop. This is an interesting piano. Liszt's father-in-law was Richard Wagner. You can read all about this in the textbook. Liszt's father-in-law was Richard Wagner. And Wagner composed at the piano. Mozart generally didn't, but Wagner did. And this is the instrument that was involved at the end portion of the composing of his opera Tristan. And we heard parts of Tristan, right? We heard the Liebestod out of Tristan. So it may have been on this very instrument that Wagner composed part of that music. Where is this instrument today? Right down the street. It's in that same collection of historical musical instruments. This is what we call the Wagner piano over there on Hill House Avenue. So pop in someday to 17 Hill House Avenue, go up the second floor, and you can see all these historic instruments. It's the greatest collection of keyboard instruments in the entire Western Hemisphere, right here, and it's virtually unknown. So that's Wagner's piano. What's of interest is, see how those lines are going straight out to the back? They're simply braces helping the soundboard there, and the strings are running at right angles to the line of the keyboard. But things didn't stay that way, interestingly enough, because as time went on, there was a German manufacturer. This is actually a Bechstein. There was another German manufacturer, however, with the name of Steinweg, who immigrated to the United States and set up in New York City. And of course, that Steinweg became what? Steinway piano manufacturers of New York City. And they instituted a couple of things, but most importantly, they instituted this idea of cross-stringing, where instead of having the bass strings run out in a straight line, they took them and run them up over, and next time you're at a grand piano, maybe come up afterwards, look at the bass strings. They run up over the other strings. What this gives is a much more homogeneous kind of sound. It's a much more homophonic instrument. Ironically, the Wagner piano, when you play it, is very clear. You don't get this kind of wash of sounds because the strings are, as you can see, a little bit more separated. And here, this may be our last slide, is what we end up with in piano, a sort of gilded Steinway from the Gilded Age. This is actually up in the Clark Museum in Williamstown, Massachusetts. But it is a Steinway piano. And you can see on it 3 pedals, and this is my last point. Initially, all the pianos up into the Steinway there, you saw just 2 pedals underneath. And these are the 2 we're going to talk about today. The rightmost pedal is called the sustaining pedal. Play that, and the sound goes away because there are dampers. There are pieces of felt up on top of the string. But I can lift all those pieces of felt, those dampers, just by pushing that pedal down, then I get... So the dampers are now up. So we call this the sustaining pedal, or the damper pedal. Sustaining pedal, more often. And the other one is the one all the way to the left. And what's happening here? AJ, look at the keyboard here, if you will. What's happening? Can you see what's happening to the keyboard as I push that left pedal? Chris, Daniel? Yeah, it's wiggling. It's going this way. What's happening is these groups of units of 3 strings are all sliding so that when you hit that way, you're now, instead of hitting 3 strings, you're hitting only 2 strings. it makes the sound softer by shifting the whole keyboard and hammer mechanism so only 2 strings are engaged instead of 3, and that makes the sound a lot more quiet. All right, that does it for the specifics of today. Let's introduce our guests. So Dan, come on up, please. Daniel Schlossberg, Jr., Yale College. What college? Is it Pearson, Daniel? Yeah, he's in Pearson. How many of you know Daniel? Brentford. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. That's right. I guess that was in Brentford. I heard a recital of him in Brentford. So Dan is a junior now. He's a music major, right? You're a music major. Any double majors, anything like that? No. Okay. Sometimes, you know, Kensho's out there doing microbiology and music, but Dan is also a composer, right? Dan does a lot of composing, so he's really into music. And do you do any conducting, Dan? A little bit of conducting. And maybe at the end of the semester, it'd be fun when we get to modern music to have Dan, do a piece by Dan. Bring the piece by Dan. We could have him come back as guest composer. So how long have you been playing piano? All right. Okay. First grade, 6, 7, something like that. Are your parents musical? Not at all. Oh, well, that's kind of musical, right? But they're not professional musicians. And any relatives in music at all? Not really. I hate to embarrass people. This is something that fascinates me. Your ear. I always think you got to have a really good ear to be able to do what you do. How good is your ear? Presumably you don't have absolute pitch. No. Okay, so if we played something for you and told you what the first note is, you would get the notes thereafter. Oh, really? How interesting. So you do have absolute pitch for, and I think this is true, that some brains are wired for absolute pitch with particular instruments. I get pretty close on the trumpet because I was in the 4th grade. I had to play in a band kind of thing, play the trumpet. So if at a young age you get locked into some instruments, those particular pitches can stick with you. That's interesting. So almost absolute pitch here. So that's one thing I wanted to ask you about, because if you have a sense of pitch and if you hear, if you know that, and playing a piece, if I go out there, I mean, what happens when somebody plays a piece of music? Lots of things are going on. Why do I, Craig, have memory lapses when Dan probably doesn't have memory lapses? Because he probably has a better ear, he can remember this more, he can stream it out there, and he hears that inside of his head. And he knows, oh, that's probably an A. And if I want that sound, I know to go to that particular spot. I'm not sure what the sound is in my head, and I sure don't know quickly, instantaneously, where that thing is. And this stuff is going by blazingly fast, so your mind's got to be wired for it to begin with. I think it's a huge benefit to have a really good ear, even if you are a pianist. Another question. Do you ever get nervous when you play, Dan? All the time. Really? Think about that. Nerves and performers.
Oh, okay.
Jacob, you ever get nervous when you play? You take drugs, Jacob? Recreationally, pharmacologically? Actually, musicians, anybody ever heard of this? Musicians do take drugs for this. Beta blockers to kind of relax them, to lower their heart rate. French horn players, I have a friend who's a professional French horn player, just to kind of get you to settle a little bit. Because if you play these instruments, and it's just a fraction of an instant, and you're like this, my God, a string player, it's a catastrophe. And then things start going downhill. So these are the kinds of mind games I think that performers have to engage. So you take lessons here, Dan, at the School of Music? You're studying anything there? Okay. At the School of Music. Do you get any time to practice? This is a busy place. Hardly. No time to practice. That's the great dilemma for Yale music performance at Yale. There's just no time to practice. What do you want to do? What do you think you want to do with this music business? Mm-hmm. So how are you going to connect the dots? How are you going to get from Dan here, point A, to Dan here 10 years from now? How do you plan to do that?
Grad school.
Probably grad school. Yeah, you got to, for better or for worse, you got to get the diploma, you know, the certificate says I can do this. You don't, it may or may not make you any better, but you sort of have to get it. To get the, it may make you worse, I don't know. You sort of have to get it to get the gig. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this Beethoven sonata we've got here. It's an interesting piece because it's so short in a way.
The whole piece.
Okay, so 10 minutes.
работы заниматься. Что ты меня сейчас скидываешь? Что, такие умные, что ли? Выпрыгивай, выпрыгивай. Да, да. Ничего не дает. да, да.